There are nights in the Mojave Desert when the silence is so complete you can hear the stars, when the temperature drops 40 degrees after sunset, and the sand holds heat like memory. That's where I found James Whitmore in October 2006, a 78-year-old man living in a trailer 30 miles from the nearest paved road, surrounded by equipment that looked like it belonged in a university laboratory, not the middle of nowhere. I was a journalist researching Cold War military installations, Area 51 adjacent stories, the usual conspiracy territory that pays bills when mainstream assignments dry up. Someone in a bar in Rachel, Nevada mentioned, "The old man who talks to lights in the desert." I figured it was dementia, or loneliness manifesting as UFO delusion. I was catastrophically wrong. James met me at the boundary of his property, if you can call a circle of rocks and weathered fence posts a boundary, with a shotgun he clearly didn't intend to use, and eyes that had seen something that fundamentally broke consensus reality. "You're the journalist," he said, "not a question. Come to write about the crazy desert hermit who thinks he talks to aliens." Something like that. "I don't think I talk to aliens," James said calmly. "I know I do. Have been since 1979. 27 years of conversation. 27 years of learning things about our species that I wish I could unlearn." He lowered the shotgun. "You want the story? The real story? Not the sanitized UFO mythology, not the government conspiracy version. The actual disturbing truth about what happened and what I learned?" "Yes." "Then you need to understand something first." James's weathered face was absolutely serious. "What I'm going to tell you will change how you see every human being you meet, every decision your species makes, every news broadcast, every war, every act of kindness or cruelty. Because once you understand what we really are, what the aliens showed me we really are, you can't unknow it. I'm listening. Not here. Inside, where he can participate." James turned toward his trailer. "Because he's still here. Not physically. His body died in 1984. But consciousness doesn't work the way we think it does. And he's been waiting for someone like you. Someone who might actually tell the story." I followed James Whitmore into a trailer in the Mojave Desert, expecting mental illness or elaborate hoax. What I found instead was the most disturbing revelation about human nature ever delivered, by something that wasn't human at all. The trailer's interior was a contradiction that immediately signaled this wasn't standard delusion. Half of it looked like any old man's dwelling. Hot plate, cot, books, photographs of a younger James with a woman and 2 children. The other half looked like a research station, computers far more sophisticated than a retired mechanic should own, monitoring equipment displaying data I couldn't interpret and covering one entire wall. Mathematical equations written in what looked like 3 different notation systems, only one of which was human. "Sarah died in 1982, James said, noticing me looking at the photographs. "Cancer. Kids stopped talking to me around 1985, when they realized their father had gone insane." He poured coffee from a percolator. "Can't blame them. I chose the alien's truth over my family's comfort. That's not a choice sane people make. But you made it. Because once you know what we really are, you can't pretend anymore. Can't participate in human society like it's normal, like it's not all based on a fundamental lie we tell ourselves." He gestured to a chair, the only furniture in the trailer that looked comfortable. His name was Thren, or that's as close as English pronunciation can get. He crashed about 40 miles northeast of here in August 1979. Not mechanical failure. His vessel was shot down. By the military? By his own species. James sat across from me, his hands wrapped around his coffee mug. He was a researcher. An anthropologist, basically, studying Earth, and he discovered something about humanity that his superiors decided was too dangerous to report, so they terminated his mission, violently, assumed the crash would kill him, but it didn't. He survived, badly injured, dying slowly but conscious. I found him 3 days after the crash while I was out prospecting. Used to look for gold as a hobby. There was wreckage everywhere, but most of it had already dissolved. Their technology biodegrades rapidly to avoid contamination. What hadn't dissolved was him. James pulled out a photograph from a locked drawer. Not a human photograph, something else. The image showed a being approximately 5 feet tall, with proportions that suggested evolution under different gravity. Skin that looked almost translucent, revealing complex structures beneath. Large eyes. The cliché was partially accurate, but the intelligence in them was unmistakable even in a photograph. I should have reported it. Called the authorities. This was the discovery of the century, proof of extraterrestrial intelligence. But when I approached him, He communicated. Not words, direct thought transfer. And the first thing he showed me was what would happen if I reported him. What would happen? Military seizure, dissection, his consciousness tortured for information before biological death, his species monitoring the situation, determining that Earth was hostile, adjusting their assessment of humanity accordingly, potential consequences including quarantine or elimination of our entire species. He could show you all that? Just transmit it? His species communicates primarily through direct consciousness transfer. Language is for record-keeping, not conversation. When he connected with my mind, I experienced his thoughts as if they were my own. James's voice carried a weight I recognized, the burden of knowledge that couldn't be unlearned. And I made a choice. I brought him here, hid him, spent my savings on medical equipment, learning alien biology, keeping him alive. For how long? 5 years. He died in 1984. But before he died, he taught me, not just about his species, but about mine, about humanity, about what we actually are underneath the mythology we've built about ourselves. James stood and walked to the wall of equations. These are his notes, his analysis of human psychology, sociology, neurology. 27 years of study condensed into mathematical models that explain human behavior with disturbing accuracy. What did he discover? That we're not what we think we are. That every assumption we make about human nature, human potential, human morality, it's all self-flattering delusion. We're animals running programs we don't understand, telling ourselves stories about consciousness and choice while being driven by impulses we can't control and don't want to acknowledge. I must have looked skeptical because James smiled grimly. You think I'm describing basic evolutionary psychology? Humans are primates with complex brains, still running ancient survival software. We know this already, don't we? We know it intellectually. We don't accept it emotionally. We still believe we're special, conscious, making real choices. That's the lie. That's what Thren discovered, and what his species found so disturbing they tried to kill him for it. James returned to his chair, his weathered face intense. Humans aren't conscious the way we think we are. We're biological machines running predictable algorithms, generating the illusion of consciousness as a byproduct. Every choice you think you're making, already determined by neurochemistry you can't access and wouldn't control if you could. Every moral judgment, post hoc rationalization of decisions your brain made before you were aware of thinking. That's determinism. Philosophers have debated. It's not philosophy, James interrupted. It's measurable fact. Thren could observe human consciousness directly. His species has technology that maps decision-making in real time. And what they discovered is that consciousness, the sense of I that you think is making choices, it's always half a second behind, watching decisions your brain already made, then constructing narratives about why you chose them. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. If that's true, then free will is an illusion. Moral responsibility is a social construct. Every human achievement, every atrocity, every act of love or hate, none of it was really chosen. We're just biological machines following programming we can't alter, believing we're autonomous because our brains generate that belief as part of their function. Why would evolution create that illusion? Because consciousness, even illusory consciousness, is useful. It allows for complex social coordination. It enables humans to simulate futures, model other minds, create culture. The illusion of choice makes you better at surviving, even though you never actually had choice. James leaned forward. But here's the disturbing part. The part that made Thren's superiors want to kill him. What? He discovered that humans are starting to figure it out. That consciousness is an illusion, and his models predicted what happens when a species stops believing in its own agency. When the illusion breaks down, what happens? James's expression was haunted. Nothing good, and it's already beginning. James led me to his computer array, equipment far beyond consumer grade, running programs that displayed human behavioral data in ways I'd never seen. Not surveillance footage, but patterns, graphs showing decision-making trends across populations, models predicting social behavior with disturbing accuracy. Thren spent 5 years teaching me how to see what he saw, James explained, how to recognize the patterns underneath human behavior. Once you know what to look for, it's everywhere. And it's accelerating. He pulled up data from the 1960s through the 2000s. Watch this. This is aggregate human behavior around decision-making. How long people take to make choices, how much anxiety they experience, how much they trust their own judgment. The graphs showed clear trends: decision time decreasing, anxiety increasing, trust in personal judgment declining. People are offloading decisions, James continued, to experts, to authority figures, to systems. Not because they're lazy, because they're unconsciously recognizing that their sense of making choices is unreliable. The illusion is cracking. You're saying people are realizing free will doesn't exist? Not consciously, but unconsciously, yes. And it manifests as decision fatigue, analysis paralysis, desperate need for external validation. He pulled up more data. Look at the pharmaceutical trends: antidepressants, anti-anxiety medications, substances that chemically enforce the illusion of well-being when the natural illusion fails. Those could be explained by increased diagnosis, reduced stigma. Could be, but look at the correlation. He overlaid the graphs with technological adoption rates. Every time humans develop technology that reveals the mechanical nature of decision-making, brain imaging, neurochemistry research, AI that predicts behavior, there's a corresponding spike in anxiety disorders and existential distress. You're saying learning we're biological machines is making us sick? I'm saying the unconscious recognition that we're biological machines is making us sick. Most people never read the research, but culturally, we're absorbing the implications. And human psychology can't handle it. James pulled up another dataset. Thren predicted this. He called it consciousness collapse, the point where a species' self-awareness exceeds its capacity for illusion maintenance. The data was undeniable: rising suicide rates, increased ideological extremism, polarization beyond rational discourse, behavioral patterns suggesting desperate attempts to reassert meaning in a world that felt increasingly mechanical. When humans start recognizing, even unconsciously, that their choices aren't real, they respond in predictable ways, James explained. Some double down on belief systems, religion, ideology, anything that reasserts special human status. That's your extremists, your fundamentalists. Others embrace the mechanism: optimization, efficiency, letting systems make decisions for them. That's your tech-obsessed rationalists. And both are responses to the same underlying recognition: that we're machines. Yes, James's voice was heavy. But here's where it gets really disturbing. Thren didn't just predict consciousness collapse, he predicted what comes after. He pulled up projections, mathematical models showing human behavior from 2000 to 2100. The curves were terrifying. Not gradual change, sudden bifurcation around 2030, 2040. When consciousness collapse reaches critical threshold, species bifurcate, James explained. Some individuals will cling to the illusion of agency no matter what evidence contradicts it. Others will fully accept their mechanical nature and optimize accordingly. And these two groups become mutually incomprehensible. You're describing polarization. I'm describing speciation. Two groups of humans with fundamentally incompatible operating systems. One running consciousness. One, the illusion of choice, meaning purpose. The other running consciousness 2.0, full acceptance of mechanical determinism, optimization without pretense of meaning. Which survives? Neither, or both. Thren's models couldn't predict that far because the outcome depends on which version of humanity controls technology. James zoomed into the projection around 2040. If the meaning seekers control technology, they'll use it to enforce their illusions. Mandatory belief systems, suppression of neuroscience that reveals mechanical nature, potentially even genetic or technological modification, to restore the capacity for illusion. And if the optimizers control technology, they'll engineer humanity into fully conscious machines, remove the illusion entirely, create beings that understand their deterministic systems and operate accordingly. Maximum efficiency, zero existential distress, complete loss of whatever made human consciousness valuable in the first place. I stared at the projections, feeling sick. This is what Thren discovered? Why his species tried to kill him? Partially. But the really disturbing part is what it means for first contact. James closed the projection and turned to face me. Thren's species has observed 17 civilizations reach consciousness collapse. 11 destroyed themselves, couldn't handle the recognition that consciousness was illusory, descended into nihilistic violence. 4 bifurcated into meaning seekers and optimizers, then fought wars of mutual extinction. 2 survived. How? By maintaining the illusion collectively. By species-wide agreement never to acknowledge the mechanical nature of consciousness. by treating neuroscience, AI research, consciousness studies as dangerous knowledge to be suppressed. James's expression was haunted. They survived by choosing ignorance, by deciding some truths are too destructive to know. And Thren wanted to recommend that for humanity? No. Thren wanted to recommend extermination. James's words hit like a physical blow. His report to his superiors argued that humanity was approaching consciousness collapse, would inevitably bifurcate, and pose too great a risk to allow continued development. Better to eliminate us before we achieved interstellar capability, and potentially spread the contagion of consciousness collapse to other civilizations. Jesus Christ. His superiors agreed. But before they could act on the recommendation, Thren had a crisis of conscience. He'd spent years studying humans, living among our culture through media and observation. He'd grown attached, started questioning whether elimination was ethical, even if it was practical. James's voice softened. That's when they shot him down, his own species trying to prevent his crisis of conscience from contaminating official policy. But he survived. He survived, and he spent 5 years teaching me everything he'd learned, everything he'd planned to report. He wanted one human to know, to understand what we really are, what we're becoming, and what choices we face. James met my eyes. He wanted someone to decide if humanity deserves to survive consciousness collapse, or if his superiors were right to recommend extermination. Why you? Because I found him. Because I chose compassion over curiosity, protection over profit. Because in that choice, illusory or not, he saw something worth preserving. James stood, moving to a locked cabinet. Before he died, he left something for me, for humanity. A choice. He opened the cabinet and pulled out a device, small, crystalline, pulsing with faint bioluminescence. This is a communication beacon, Thren's final gift. If activated, it signals his species, tells them there's one human who knows the truth, one human who understands the danger humanity poses. James placed it on the table between us, and it asks them to reconsider extermination, to give humanity a chance to navigate consciousness collapse consciously, rather than stumbling into it blind. What happens if you activate it? First contact. Real first contact. His species revealing themselves, sharing technology, helping humanity navigate the transition. James's weathered hands trembled slightly, or possibly confirming that humanity is too dangerous, consciousness collapse too inevitable, and proceeding with the original recommendation to eliminate us before we spread to other worlds. So it's a gamble. It's a choice. Maybe the only real choice a human has ever made, because I'm making it with full knowledge of what I am. A biological machine running deterministic programs, generating the illusion of agency, but making the choice anyway because what else can I do? James looked at me with eyes that had carried this burden for 27 years. I've spent almost 3 decades trying to decide. Activate the beacon and risk everything on the hope that Thren was right to value humanity, or stay silent and let us stumble toward consciousness collapse without intervention, preserving our illusion of independence even if it leads to extinction. Why haven't you decided? Because I couldn't. I'm one biological machine making a decision that affects billions of others. I have no right. He pushed the beacon toward me. But maybe you do. You're a journalist, a storyteller. You shape narrative. And maybe that's what humanity needs. Not the cold mathematics Thren provided, but a story about what we are and what we could be. You want me to decide whether to signal an alien species that might exterminate humanity? I want you to hear the whole story first. Everything Thren discovered. Every disturbing detail about what humans really are underneath our self-flattering mythology. James's expression was intense. Then you decide. Activate the beacon or don't. Tell the story or stay silent. But whatever you choose knowing the full truth. I looked at the pulsing device. The weight of the choice was crushing. Tell me, I said. Tell me everything. Over the next 72 hours, James walked me through Thren's complete analysis of humanity. Not the sanitized version suitable for public consumption, but the raw, disturbing observations of an alien anthropologist who'd spent decades studying our species with tools that could map consciousness directly. Start with the basics, James said, pulling up neurological data. Human consciousness operates on a 7-layer processing system, 7 distinct levels of cognition, each with different response times, different decision-making algorithms, different evolutionary purposes. He showed me brain scans with regions highlighted. Layer 1 is pure reflex, stimulus response, No consciousness involved. Touch something hot. Pull back before you're aware of pain. Layer 2 is emotional response. Threat assessment. This evolved for survival. Quick decisions about danger that can't wait for analysis. This is standard neuroscience, I said. Keep going. Layer 3 is social modeling. Theory of mind. Predicting what others will do. Simulating their thoughts. Layer 4 is narrative construction. Your brain taking fragmented sensory input and creating coherent story. Layer 5 is abstraction. Symbolic thinking. Language. Mathematics. Okay. Layer 6 is where it gets interesting. Metacognition. Thinking about thinking. This is the layer that generates the sense of I, the feeling that there's a unified consciousness making decisions. James's expression was grim, but layers 1 through 5 operate faster than layer 6. By the time you're aware of making a decision, the decision has already been made by faster unconscious processes. The half-second delay you mentioned? Exactly. But here's what Thren discovered that human neuroscience hasn't fully accepted. Layer 6 doesn't actually make decisions. It watches decisions being made by other layers, then constructs narratives about why you chose them. The sense of agency is post hoc rationalization. So consciousness is just narration. Storytelling about choices our brains already made? That's the disturbing part, James confirmed. The you that feels like it's in control is actually a spectator, a narrator explaining events that already happened. But evolution built in the illusion that narrator is in control because that illusion is useful. He pulled up more data. Watch this. Thren could measure the exact timing of decision-making across all 7 layers. In humans, layer 6 activation, conscious awareness, always lags behind layers 2 through 5. Always. No exceptions. You literally cannot be aware of making a choice before your brain has already made it. The data was irrefutable. Decision preceded awareness. Action preceded conscious intention. The sense of choosing was always retrospective. And layer 7? I asked. James's expression darkened. Layer 7 is the crisis. It's the layer that evaluates the other layers. Metacognition. It's the part of consciousness that can recognize consciousness itself as an illusion. And humans are just now evolving this capacity. Evolution is creating the ability to recognize consciousness as illusory? Yes. And it's devastating human psychology. He pulled up medical data. Anxiety disorders, depression, existential crises, all spiking dramatically from 1980 to 2006. Layer 7 activation correlates with psychological distress, because once you recognize that consciousness is narrative rather than agency, the whole structure becomes unstable. That's consciousness collapse. That's the trigger. But the collapse itself is social, not individual. James showed me network analysis, social media patterns, political polarization, ideological fragmentation. When enough individuals experience layer 7 activation, they can no longer cooperate effectively. Because cooperation depends on shared illusions about agency, morality, meaning. So we're literally evolving ourselves into dysfunction? We're evolving faster than our psychological structures can adapt. Layer 7 is too advanced for layers 1 through 6. It's like running modern software on hardware that wasn't designed for it. The system becomes unstable. I spent hours reviewing Thren's data. Mathematical models predicting human behavior with 73% accuracy, far beyond any human psychological theory. Pattern recognition showing that ideological beliefs were predictable from childhood environment, genetic markers, and early experiences. Decision-making algorithms showing that what humans called choice was deterministic output of measurable inputs. Every analysis pointed to the same conclusion. Human consciousness was a sophisticated illusion generated by biological machinery, and humanity was beginning to recognize that fact. Why is this knowledge so dangerous? I asked. Why did Thren's species consider it grounds for extermination? Because of what happens when a technological species recognizes it's mechanical, James explained. They stop self-regulating. Morality depends on belief in agency and responsibility. If decisions are deterministic, there's no such thing as moral choice, just biological processes. That's nihilism? Exactly. And nihilistic species with advanced technology are existentially dangerous. They pursue goals without ethical constraints because ethics require believing in responsibility. They optimize without regard for consequences because consequences are just more mechanical processes. James's voice was urgent. Thren's species observed this pattern 17 times. Species reach consciousness collapse, recognize their mechanical nature, lose ethical constraints, and either destroy themselves or become predatory toward other civilizations. So humanity is approaching that crisis point. We're in it, right now. Look around. James gestured at the computer screen showing news feeds, political extremism, environmental destruction, wealth concentration, technological development without ethical consideration. These aren't separate problems, they're symptoms of species-wide consciousness collapse. And Thren's species wants to exterminate us before we spread this pattern to other worlds. Wanted. Past tense. Thren changed his mind. Before he died, he concluded that humanity might be different, that we might navigate consciousness collapse without becoming either extinct or predatory. Why did he think that? James was quiet for a long moment. Because of me. Because I chose to save him instead of profiting from his existence. Because in 5 years together, he observed human capacity for compassion that persisted even when I understood it was mechanically generated. He concluded that maybe, humans could maintain ethical behavior even while recognizing it was illusory. Could we? I don't know. I've spent 27 years trying to figure that out, watching human behavior, looking for signs that we can handle the truth about ourselves. James's weathered face showed every year of that burden. And I genuinely can't tell if we're adapting or collapsing. He gestured to the beacon. That's why I need you. A fresh perspective. Someone who hasn't spent 3 decades obsessing over this question. You've seen Thren's data. You understand what we are. Do you think humanity deserves first contact? Deserves help navigating consciousness collapse? Or are we too dangerous, too close to nihilistic breakdown, too likely to spread dysfunction to the galaxy? You're asking me to judge the entire species. I'm asking you to make the only choice that might matter. Signal for help, risking extermination, or stay silent, letting humanity face consciousness collapse alone. The beacon pulsed on the table between us, neither condemning nor promising. Just waiting. There's a third option, I said slowly. What? Tell the story. Not activate the beacon. Not stay silent. Publish what Thren discovered. Let humanity know what we are. Let people choose how to respond with full knowledge. James looked at me with something between hope and horror. That might accelerate the collapse. If people consciously recognize consciousness is illusory, or it might be the only way to navigate it consciously rather than stumbling in blind. I met his eyes. You said Thren thought humans might be different. Maybe we are. Maybe knowing the truth about ourselves is what allows us to transcend it. Or maybe it's what guarantees our extinction. Maybe, I agreed. But at least it would be our choice, made with full knowledge. Isn't that the closest thing to genuine agency we could have? James stared at the beacon for a long time. Then he started laughing. Exhausted, borderline hysterical laughter. 27 years, he gasped. 27 years trying to decide, and you figured it out in 3 days. The answer was always to share the knowledge. Let humanity decide collectively, not play God. So you'll help me? Tell the full story? Everything Thren discovered? Everything, James confirmed. And let the chips fall where they may. James and I spent the next 2 weeks compiling everything. Thren's analysis, the mathematical models, the neurological data, the predictions about consciousness collapse. Everything needed to prove that an alien anthropologist had studied humanity and concluded we were biological machines generating the illusion of consciousness. But as we worked, something shifted in James's demeanor. He became increasingly agitated, questioning the decision to publish. I've been thinking about the ethics, he said on day 9. Not human ethics, observer ethics. Thren violated his species' prime directive by interfering with human development. And now we're about to do the same thing. We're not interfering. We're revealing what's already true. We're revealing it before humanity was ready to discover it naturally. That's interference. James pulled up historical data. Look at this. Human recognition of mechanical consciousness has been gradual. Philosophy, psychology, neuroscience. Slow discovery over centuries. That gradual revelation allows cultural adaptation, psychological adjustment. And you think rapid revelation would be too much? Thren thought so. His models predicted that if humans learned the full truth about consciousness too quickly, before cultural frameworks adapted, it would trigger immediate collapse, widespread nihilism, spike in suicide, violence, social breakdown. The data supported his concern. Models showing that rapid paradigm shifts in human worldview correlated with violence and instability. The faster humans lost foundational beliefs, the more dangerous the transition period. But we can't unknow what we know, I argued. The information exists. You've been sitting on it for 27 years. How much longer should it stay hidden? Until humanity is ready. How do we know when that is? What criteria determine readiness? James had no answer. We'd reached the ethical core of the problem. Paternalistic protection versus autonomous knowledge. Deciding for others what they could handle versus respecting their right to information. Let me show you something, James said, pulling up a different data set. This is what Thren discovered about human ethical systems. The disturbing part I haven't explained yet. The data showed patterns in human moral judgment across cultures, historical periods, and ideological frameworks. Despite enormous surface diversity, all human ethics reduced to the same mathematical algorithms. Human morality is computational, James explained. Your brain runs cost-benefit analysis on social behavior. Cooperation is rewarded with dopamine. Defection is punished with guilt. Moral emotions, empathy, fairness, justice, they're all optimizations for social coordination, not transcendent truths. That's basically evolutionary ethics. We know this. We know it intellectually. But look at what happens when humans deeply accept it. He showed me studies of moral philosophy students, their behavior after studying meta-ethics, evolutionary ethics, moral relativism. They become less ethical, not dramatically, but measurably. Cheating increases, cooperation decreases, empathy declines. Because recognizing morality is mechanical removes the motivation to be moral. Exactly. The illusion that morality is real, that ethical behavior matters in some cosmic sense. That illusion is what makes humans behave ethically. Remove the illusion, and you remove the motivation. James's expression was haunted. That's what consciousness collapse really means. Not just recognizing that consciousness is illusory, recognizing that morality is too. And once that recognition spreads, he pulled up Thren's projections again, the bifurcation around 2030, 2040. But now he highlighted something I'd missed before, a spike in violence immediately preceding the split. This is what Thren predicted, a 10 to 15-year period of chaos. Humans who've accepted mechanical consciousness abandoning ethical constraints, while humans who maintain the illusion react with religious fundamentalism, authoritarian control, desperate attempts to enforce meaning through power. A war between the enlightened and the delusional. A war neither side can win, because the enlightened lack motivation to build anything positive, and the delusional lack flexibility to adapt. James's voice was urgent. That's why Thren recommended extermination, not because humans are evil, because we're approaching a crisis that will make us evil or make us extinct. I sat with this for a long time, looking at the data, understanding the implications. So publishing this information might trigger exactly what Thren feared, I said slowly. Rapid consciousness collapse, widespread nihilism, social breakdown. It might. Or, James pulled up one more data set. There's another possibility. The two surviving species Thren's people observed. They both had something humans don't. What? Advance warning. Both species received messages from observer civilizations before consciousness collapse. Both were told explicitly what was coming, what the dangers were, what choices they faced. And that knowledge, that meta-knowledge that they were approaching a crisis, allowed them to navigate it consciously. So information about the danger actually helped? In those two cases, yes. But the observers didn't just dump data and leave. They provided frameworks, ethical systems designed for post-collapse consciousness, ways to maintain cooperative behavior without requiring belief in transcendent meaning. James pulled up alien philosophy, frameworks I could barely comprehend. They taught these species how to be ethical machines, how to choose cooperation even while knowing it was mechanical. Can humans learn that? Thren thought we could. That's why he left the beacon. He wanted his species to provide the same kind of guided transition, but I never activated it because I wasn't sure if humans deserved that help, if we'd earned it, if accepting alien guidance was surrender or wisdom. And now I think there's a middle path. James looked at me intently. We publish the information. All of it. Everything Thren discovered about human consciousness, morality, the approaching crisis. But we frame it carefully, not as nihilistic revelation, but as challenge. We tell humans, this is what you are. This is the crisis you face. And these are the frameworks other species use to navigate it successfully. Give people both the problem and potential solutions. Give people agency, even while explaining that agency is illusory. Because maybe the solution to consciousness collapse is choosing to act as if consciousness matters, even while knowing it doesn't. Maybe ethics can survive the recognition that ethics is mechanical. That's sophisticated philosophical ground. Humans are sophisticated. That's what Thren underestimated, or what he came to appreciate before he died. We're machines, yes, but we're machines capable of choosing to act against our programming when we understand what the programming is. James activated a recording device. Let's do this properly. Full interview. Everything I know. Everything Thren taught me. And then we publish it with one clear message. Humanity. Your biological machine's approaching consciousness collapse. Here's what that means. Here's what other species did to survive. Now choose, collectively, consciously, what kind of machine you want to be. And the beacon? I asked. James looked at it for a long moment. We'll include it in the story. Tell people it exists. Explain what it does. But we don't activate it ourselves. We let humanity decide collectively whether to signal for help. Democratic choice about first contact. That could be dangerous. What if people choose wrong? Then we chose wrong. But at least we chose. With full knowledge. Full consciousness of what we are. James smiled grimly. Maybe that's the only real choice biological machines can make. Not choice about what to do, but choice about how to understand what we're already going to do anyway. I pressed record, and James Whitmore began telling the full story of Thren, the alien anthropologist who discovered humanity's disturbing truth, and died hoping we could survive knowing it. I published the article in December 2006. Not in mainstream media. No major outlet would touch it. Too bizarre, too unverifiable, too philosophically dense for general readership. Instead, I put it online. Early internet, before social media made everything viral. Just a long-form piece on an obscure website, with all of Thren's data available as downloads. I expected nothing. Maybe a few conspiracy theorists would latch onto it. Maybe it would become an underground curiosity. I'd done my job, shared the information, given humanity the knowledge, and whatever happened next was out of my hands. The response was immediate and divided exactly as Thren had predicted. Within a week, the article had been shared across academic philosophy forums. Neuroscientists were analyzing the data. Psychologists were debating the implications, and the bifurcation was already visible in the reactions. Group 1 dismissed it entirely. Obvious hoax, sophisticated fiction, possibly an elaborate art project. These were people whose psychological architecture required belief in consciousness, agency, meaning. The data was irrelevant to them. They would maintain the illusion no matter what evidence contradicted it. Group 2 became obsessed, downloaded all of Thren's models, verified the mathematical predictions, replicated the behavioral analyses. These were people whose cognitive structure could handle mechanical consciousness. They accepted the data and began exploring implications. But there was a Group 3 I hadn't anticipated. People who'd already suspected consciousness was illusory, who'd been living with that recognition in isolation, and suddenly found validation and community. They emerged from philosophy departments, neuroscience labs, existential crisis forums, hundreds, then thousands of people saying, "I've always known this. I just didn't have language for it." The responses varied wildly. From a philosopher in Berlin, "I've spent 15 years studying consciousness. Your article synthesizes everything I've theorized but couldn't prove. The 7-layer model explains phenomena that no human theory accounts for. This is either the most sophisticated hoax ever created, or the most important discovery in human history." From a neuroscientist in Tokyo, "The timing data matches our research but extends it in ways we hadn't considered. If this is real, if an external observer mapped human consciousness this comprehensively, it changes everything about cognitive science." From someone identifying only as M in Seattle, "I've been suicidal for 3 years because I recognized consciousness was illusory, and life felt meaningless. Your article saved me. Not by contradicting what I'd realized, but by showing I wasn't alone, and by suggesting there might be frameworks for maintaining ethical behavior without requiring belief in meaning. Thank you." But there was also darker response. Anonymous post on a philosophy forum. "If morality is mechanical and consciousness is illusion, then nothing matters. I'm free to pursue optimization without ethical constraints. This is liberation. Email to my published address. You've destroyed everything that makes humans cooperate. Morality, responsibility, meaning. all revealed as illusions. You've triggered exactly what this Thrain character warned about. Blood is on your hands. James called me 2 weeks after publication, his voice strained. Have you seen the behavioral data? What data? Crime statistics, suicide rates, charitable donations. I've been tracking them since publication. There's a measurable shift. He sent me files. The numbers were small but statistically significant. Suicide up 1.2%, violent crime up 0.7%, charitable donations down 2.3%. I know correlation isn't causation, but the timing is exact. And it matches Thren's predictions about rapid consciousness collapse. Information spread too quickly. Psychological frameworks couldn't adapt. Behavioral stability declined. I felt sick. Are you saying I caused this? I'm saying we caused this. Together, by choosing to publish. James's voice was heavy. But we also can't know the counterfactual. Maybe these changes were already happening. Maybe consciousness collapse was inevitable, and we just accelerated the visible symptoms. What do? We follow through. We promised frameworks, not just problems, time to deliver. Over the next 3 months, James and I published follow-up pieces, not about what humans are, but about what humans could choose to be. We outlined the ethical frameworks Thren's species had provided to the 2 successful civilizations, systems for maintaining cooperation, empathy, and social coordination, even while recognizing their mechanical basis. The core principle was simple but profound. Act as if consciousness and morality matter, even while knowing they don't. Choose cooperation, even while understanding it's programmed. Generate meaning, even while recognizing meaning is constructed. Philosopher Derek Parfit had called it reasons as fundamental. Thren's species called it conscious mechanism, the ability to be simultaneously aware of being a machine and committed to operating as if that awareness doesn't eliminate responsibility. The response to these frameworks was even more divided. Group 1 still rejected everything, couldn't engage with ethics that didn't assume transcendent meaning. Group 2 analyzed the frameworks intellectually, but struggled to implement them emotionally. Understanding that you should act as if morality matters doesn't generate the emotional motivation to actually be moral. But Group 3, the people who'd already recognized consciousness was illusory, responded differently. They reported relief, liberation. The frameworks gave them permission to choose ethics without requiring belief in cosmic significance. Email from M in Seattle. For 3 years I thought recognizing consciousness was illusory meant I couldn't be ethical, that ethics required belief I couldn't honestly hold. Your framework changes that. I can choose cooperation, empathy, kindness, not because they're cosmically meaningful, but because I want to be the kind of machine that generates those behaviors. That's enough. But we'd also attracted concerning attention. Government intelligence agencies, military researchers, corporate strategists, people interested in Thren's data not for philosophical insight, but for predictive power. If human behavior was mechanically deterministic, it could be manipulated with precision. James received a visit in March 2007, 3 people identifying as Department of Defense contractors, wanting access to Thren's complete datasets, specifically the predictive models showing how to trigger behavioral changes in populations. They wanted to weaponize it, James told me on the phone, his voice shaking. Use Thren's models to engineer consent, manipulate populations, optimize humans for compliance. They called it applied consciousness mechanics. What did you tell them? I told them Thren predicted this too. That species who weaponize consciousness research accelerate their own collapse. That using mechanical understanding of consciousness for control rather than liberation is exactly what dooms civilizations. James paused. They didn't care. They said control was the same as liberation. That optimizing human behavior for cooperation and peace justified any method. Did you give them the data? No. And they left with polite threats about national security and obstruction. His voice hardened. But they'll be back. Or others will. Once you prove consciousness is mechanical, everyone wants to use that mechanism. That night I realized what Thren's species had understood, and we'd naively missed. Information about consciousness isn't just philosophical. It's technological. The most dangerous technology ever created. Not weapons or AI or genetic engineering, but precise understanding of human decision-making mechanics. In the wrong hands or even in well-intentioned hands with poor ethical frameworks, That understanding could optimize humanity right out of existence. We'd thought publishing was sharing knowledge. We'd actually created a weapon, and now we had to decide what to do about it. The confrontation came in April 2007, but not in the form I expected. Not government agents or corporate researchers. Something else entirely. I received an email with no sender address, written in English but structured strangely, syntax that felt translated, concepts that didn't quite fit human linguistic frameworks. Observer James Whitmore protected Thren for 5 years. Observer your name shared Thren's final analysis with human population. You have fulfilled Thren's final wish. Now comes question. Do humans demonstrate capacity for conscious mechanism, or do you fulfill predictions of collapse? We are watching. We are deciding. I called James immediately. Did you get the email? Yes. His voice was strange, calm, almost relieved. They're here. Thren's species, watching to see what humans do with the information. How long have they been watching? Since I published, I'd guess, maybe before. They monitor their observers' crash sites. They knew Thren survived initially, knew he was being sheltered. They've probably been observing this whole situation for 27 years. And now they're deciding whether to exterminate us, or make contact or leave us alone. The email doesn't specify. James was quiet for a moment. Come to the desert, tonight. I think they want to meet us. I drove through the night, arriving at James's trailer at dawn. He was already outside, staring at the horizon where rock formations created natural amphitheater shapes. They'll come at sunset, he said without greeting. That's when Thren's vessel crashed. Symbolic timing. We spent the day in silence. No preparation, no planning. What could we prepare? What could we plan? We'd shared information that might doom or save humanity, and now its creators were coming to evaluate our choice. As the sun descended, James activated the beacon for the first time in 27 years. The response was immediate. Not a vessel, nothing physical. Instead, the air itself seemed to shimmer, and I felt pressure inside my skull that wasn't quite pain. Consciousness intrusion. The same direct thought transfer Thren had used with James. 3 presences. Distinct minds I could feel the edges of without fully accessing. Vast intelligence that made human cognition feel like crude machinery by comparison. One presence addressed us directly, not in words but in concepts that my brain automatically translated. Greeting, recognition. You are the humans who protected Observer Thren and shared his final analysis. We acknowledge debt and obligation. We also acknowledge danger you have created. James responded verbally. Apparently speech was adequate for their translation systems. Danger to humanity or danger to you? Both. All. Species that achieve consciousness mechanics before ethical maturity pose danger to galactic stability. Thren's analysis confirmed human trajectory toward collapse. Your publication of that analysis may have accelerated crisis, or given humans tools to navigate it consciously, I interjected. Possibility exists. Probability low. We have observed humans since publication. Behavioral indicators show bifurcation beginning, violence metrics increasing, cooperation metrics declining, consciousness collapse progressing as Thren predicted. The presence shared data, their observations of human behavior over the past 4 months. The trends were undeniable. Small but measurable shifts toward polarization, nihilism, ethical abandonment. Because they're learning their machines, James said quietly. And human psychology can't handle that recognition yet. Correct analysis. Human consciousness evolved for survival, not truth. Truth about mechanical nature undermines motivational systems. Consciousness depends on. Most species at this stage choose ignorance. You chose knowledge. Noble. Also, dangerous. So what now? I asked. You exterminate us for being too dangerous, or help us navigate the crisis? The presences conferred. I felt information exchange at speeds and complexity beyond my comprehension. Then, we offer choice. 3 paths, as Thren recommended before termination. Path 1, extermination. We eliminate human species before consciousness collapse spreads beyond Earth, prevents potential future threat to galactic civilization. Permanent solution. Path 2, quarantine. We establish monitoring barrier preventing human expansion beyond your solar system. Allow consciousness collapse to resolve naturally, extinction or adaptation, no interference, but containment. Path 3, integration. We reveal ourselves fully, provide frameworks, technology, guidance for navigating consciousness collapse, help humans become conscious machines capable of ethical behavior without illusion, risky, requires accepting alien governance during transition period. Those aren't choices, James said, anger edging his voice, and those are ultimatums: extermination, imprisonment, or colonization. All choices are constrained. We offer best options available given human developmental stage and crisis trajectory. Choose or we choose for you. I looked at James. 27 years he'd protected Thren. 27 years he'd carried this burden. And now 3 alien intelligences were demanding we decide humanity's fate based on 4 months of behavioral data. There's a 4th path, I said quietly. Specify. You leave. Completely. Stop watching, stop interfering, stop evaluating. You gave us information through Thren's work. We published it. Now let humans respond however we're going to respond, without alien observers influencing outcomes. That path leads to collapse or chaos. Maybe. Or maybe it leads to something your models don't predict because you're not us. I felt strength building. Thren spent 27 years studying humans. He concluded we might be different, that our irrational insistence on agency, even illusory agency, might allow us to navigate consciousness collapse in unprecedented ways. Thren's conclusion was speculation, based on emotional attachment, not rigorous analysis. Emotional attachment is data, James interjected. Thren learned to value humans not despite his emotional response but because of it. He recognized that emotion, even mechanically generated emotion, matters. That's the human insight your species can't access through pure cognition. The presences were silent. I felt them processing, evaluating, struggling with concepts that didn't fit their frameworks. You propose we trust human capacity for adaptation without evidence supporting that trust. We propose you honor Thren's sacrifice, I said. He violated your protocols to protect humanity, died believing we deserved a chance. Either his judgment matters or it doesn't. Either observer experience counts or only cold analysis counts. Observer experience contradicts cold analysis. This creates decision paralysis. Then choose the option that honors your dead, James said quietly. Thren believed in us. Be worthy of his belief. The silence stretched for long minutes. Then, we choose temporary path, 5-year observation period without interference. If humans demonstrate capacity for conscious mechanism, maintaining ethical cooperation despite recognizing mechanical nature, we will leave permanently. If humans demonstrate consciousness collapse leading to violence, nihilism, or expansionist aggression, we will implement quarantine or extermination. This is compromise, not optimal for any party, but honors observer. Thren's final recommendation while protecting galactic stability. 5 years, I repeated. 5 Earth years. Beginning now. We will not reveal ourselves. Will not interfere. Will observe only. Humanity will navigate consciousness, collapse alone, with only information Thren provided and frameworks you have published. And at the end of 5 years, we evaluate. If worthy, defined as maintaining cooperation metrics above threshold despite consciousness collapse knowledge, you continue unmonitored. If unworthy, defined as descent into violence, nihilism, or dangerous expansionism, you face quarantine or removal. The presences began withdrawing. But before disconnecting completely, one final communication. Observer Thren valued humanity. We do not share his valuation, but we honor his judgment enough to grant temporary reprieve, use it wisely, or prove his faith misplaced. Then they were gone. The pressure in my skull released. The sunset looked normal again. James and I stood in the desert silence for a long time. 5 years, he said finally, to prove humanity can handle the truth about itself. Or prove we can't. Either way, we made the choice, published the information. Now we live with consequences. We watched the stars emerge, knowing that among them intelligences were watching us, judging us, deciding if we deserve to survive knowing what we are. The test had begun, and humanity didn't even know it was being tested. I'm writing this in 2012. 5 years have passed since that desert meeting. The evaluation period is complete, and I don't know if we passed or failed. The behavioral data is mixed. Consciousness collapse accelerated exactly as predicted. Polarization increased. Ideological fragmentation intensified. Nihilism spread among those who accepted mechanical consciousness. But something else happened too. Something Thren's models didn't account for. The frameworks took hold. Slowly. Awkwardly. But they spread. Group 3, the people who could accept mechanical consciousness without abandoning ethics, grew. Not rapidly, but steadily. They built communities, developed practices, created cultures around conscious mechanism, living as if meaning matters while knowing it doesn't, choosing cooperation while understanding it's programmed. They called themselves different things: conscious machines, ethical determinists, meaning engineers. The terminology varied, but the core principle was consistent. Accept what you are, then choose what you do anyway. By 2010, there were organized groups in 17 countries. By 2012, hundreds of thousands globally. Still a minority, maybe 5% of humanity, but growing. And behavioral studies showed something remarkable. These communities maintained cooperation metrics equal to or exceeding religious communities, despite lacking belief in transcendent meaning. They'd found a way to be ethical machines. But the other 95% fractured predictably. Group 1 doubled down on meaning. Religious fundamentalism spiked, authoritarian movements grew, desperate attempts to enforce traditional values against the tide of mechanical consciousness recognition. Group 2, people who accepted mechanism but couldn't maintain ethics without belief, showed increased nihilism, depression, social withdrawal. They'd learned they were machines but couldn't figure out how to be good machines. Violence increased, not dramatically, but measurably. Suicide rates climbed. Social cohesion declined. Every indicator Thren predicted showed deterioration, except for that stubborn 5%, proving that conscious mechanism was possible. Was it enough? Did humanity pass the test? I received one final communication in January 2012. Same untraceable email format. Evaluation period complete. Results mixed.
Humanity demonstrates capacity for conscious mechanism in minority population. Majority demonstrates predicted consciousness collapse symptoms. Net assessment: insufficient evidence to implement extermination. Insufficient evidence to guarantee safety. Decision: extended observation without interference. You remain neither exterminated nor integrated. You remain observed. Observer Thren's faith in humanity: partially vindicated. Insufficient to justify full trust.
Sufficient to justify continued existence. This is neither victory nor defeat. This is probation. Additional factor: you published information rather than weaponizing it. Multiple state and corporate entities sought consciousness mechanics for control purposes. You refused collaboration. This demonstrates ethical capacity relevant to evaluation. Final message: humanity has time. Not unlimited time, but time to demonstrate whether conscious mechanism can spread from 5% to critical threshold, whether you can handle truth about yourselves without self-destruction. We will continue watching. You will not know when or how. Live as if worthy of survival. That is only advice we offer. The communication ended. No response mechanism. No follow-up. Just probation and observation. James died in 2011. Peacefully. In his trailer. Surrounded by Thren's equations. His last words to me were, "I think we did right. Not perfectly, but right. We gave humans information and let them choose. Some chose well. That's enough. I'm not sure it's enough, but it's what we have." Since 2012, I've watched the percentage of conscious mechanism practitioners grow. Slowly, 5% became 7%, then 10. By 2023, some studies suggest 15% of humanity has integrated conscious mechanism frameworks, understanding their biological machines and maintaining ethical behavior anyway. It's not majority, but it's growing. The rest of humanity continues fragmenting. Political polarization reached levels that seem unsustainable. Climate crisis intensified. Technological development accelerated without corresponding ethical evolution. All the symptoms Thren predicted. But that 15%, they're building something. Not utopia, not salvation, just functional communities of conscious machines who choose cooperation without requiring cosmic justification. Maybe that's transcendence. Not ascending to higher consciousness, but descending into mechanical consciousness and choosing to act ethically anyway. Creating meaning while knowing meaning is created. Generating values while understanding values are generated. It's not the heroic destiny humanity wanted, but it might be the realistic destiny we needed. I don't know if the observers are satisfied. I don't know when they'll make their final decision about humanity's fate. Maybe they already have and just haven't informed us. But I know this. James was right. We did right by publishing, by giving humans information rather than making decisions for them, by trusting that at least some humans could handle truth about themselves. It wasn't naive optimism. It was pragmatic respect for human capacity to surprise, to adapt, to generate ethical behavior from mechanical processes through sheer stubborn choice. We're biological machines generating the illusion of consciousness. That's true, disturbingly true. But we're also biological machines capable of choosing ethics despite recognizing they're illusory, capable of generating meaning despite knowing it's generated, capable of cooperation despite understanding it's programmed. That's not less valuable for being mechanical. If anything, it's more impressive. Rocks fall because gravity compels them. Humans cooperate because we choose to, even while knowing choice itself is mechanism. Maybe that's what the observers needed to see. Not that humans aren't machines, but that being machines doesn't prevent ethical behavior. That mechanical consciousness can be conscious mechanism. Thrien saw it. In his 5 years with James, watching one human choose compassion over profit, protection over exploitation, relationship over utility, all programmed, perhaps. But program that generates good outcomes is still good program. I'm 65 years old now. I've spent 17 years watching humanity process the most disturbing truth we've ever learned about ourselves. And I've concluded this. We're not special. We're not cosmically significant. Consciousness is illusory. Morality is mechanical, meaning is constructed. And none of that matters. Because we're the machines that can know we're machines and choose to be good machines anyway. That's humanity. That's our answer to Thrien's question. We're biological machines who generate love, beauty, ethics, meaning, and do it consciously, knowing it's generated, choosing to generate it anyway. If that's not enough for the observers, then nothing would be. And if it is enough, if that's what they were watching for, then maybe humanity will be fine after all. We're on probation. Maybe permanent probation. Maybe we always were, from the moment we evolved consciousness complex enough to question itself. But we're still here, still choosing, still generating meaning in a mechanical universe. That's terrifying. And somehow it's also beautiful.